Well, a victory for Ron Paul. The Texas congressman swept the state of Minnesota in the Republican Party convention there. Take a look at these headlines from over the weekend. Ron Paul wins Minnesota big. Ron Paul racks up delegates in Minnesota. Supporter wins Senate nomination. Ron Paul supporters claim 12 of 13 national at-large delegates. Ron Paul, still competing, continues his delegate winning streak in Minnesota. Ron Paul supporters dominate Minnesota GOP convention. So what's next? That's right, the dark horse in the Republican presidential race. Ron Paul won 12 of the 13 delegate slots. So now, in total, 32 of Minnesota's 40 national delegates to the Republican convention will go to Paul. Now, this is a huge win for Paul supporters, especially after the presidential candidate announced he would stop campaigning in states due to lack of funding. So what does this mean for Paul's campaign and his supporters? Joining us now to talk more about this is Austin Petersen. He is the director of production for FreedomWorks. Welcome to the show, Austin. So what do you make of this Ron Paul victory?
Rumors of Ron Paul's death have been greatly exaggerated. You know, he won 12 of 13 of the state delegates, and as you said, he actually has 33 out of 40. So that's a grand majority of the state of Minnesota that will be going to the national convention to support Ron Paul. I think 30 people is enough by itself to make a little bit of noise, not to mention all the delegates that could exist from other states that he's won. I believe it's 5 states, Colorado, Maine, Minnesota, and some other states as well, Louisiana, that he's won in. But it does prove that there will be a sizable contingent of Ron Paul supporters at the Tampa convention.
Certainly, this seems to indicate that. But, you know, a lot of people right now are saying, given the fact that Ron Paul looks like he won't win the nomination, they're saying that it's Romney who has secured this at this point. They're asking, what are these delegates, what are they trying to achieve now by voting for him? Well,
Ron Paul's delegates can win a variety of victories. They can go and they can change the national conversation by affecting the platform. They can deny Romney a majority of votes in several of the votes that occurred during the Republican National Convention. So there's all sorts of trouble that the Paulistas can invoke for the majority, for the establishment GOP. There's all sorts of battles that can be won, and the major ones would be those that would affect platform changes toward things like auditing the Federal Reserve, toning down some of the provisions of the National Defense Authorization Act, and some other things that we might be able to get concessions from the Romney camp.
So he has stopped actively, not too long ago, made the announcement he stopped actively campaigning in states that haven't yet held primaries. Instead, he is now focusing on this delegate strategy. What happened in Minnesota, is that evidence that his strategy is working?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that this sort of idea that he's not campaigning in these primary states was sort of a feint to get some of the Romney people to think, oh, it's all over, maybe get them to stay home so that they don't have to work as hard to get votes, and then what happens is Ron Paul would increase his vote total. But I think what happens now is that Ron Paul's delegates have to hunker down. They have to play a bunker strategy. They've got to stay quiet. Some of these delegates are overtly Romney supporters from what they've said. They have to pledge to support Mitt Romney, but they're actually Ron Paul supporters underneath. I know that a lot of people in the Romney camp have even said that they're terrified of that, so we'll have to see what happens in Tampa, but we won't know until we get there.
Interesting. Well, you know, many Paul supporters, I've spoken to a lot of them, say that it's not necessarily about winning, but more about Ron Paul's message. What do you think about that?
Well, I think we are winning. I think that we've won a lot of battles in the last 5 years. I think we've woken up the entire American people to the idea of what is a libertarian. So there have been a lot of victories that have been won. There was an audit of the Fed a few years ago. We did find out who got the bailout money. We found out that McDonald's was a primary recipient of some of the bailout money in 2008. So there was a victory there. It wasn't audited. It was a watered-down bill. It wasn't the entire audit of the Fed. But there have been victories that are won. I think that there are big victories to come on the horizon as well.
And so some of his victories there. Another goal Ron Paul supporters say of theirs is to change the discussion within the Republican Party. To what extent do you think that he has achieved that?
Well, I think that he has caused a lot of Republicans to start taking a good, harsh, critical view of the Federal Reserve and Ben Bernanke's monetary policy that has been a continuation of the Greenspan monetary policy, the inflationary monetary policy that has stolen the savings of retired people and the poor people who have have tried to save their money, and they see themselves not able to keep up with the rising cost of goods. This is now a standard Republican talking point to criticize the Federal Reserve and to take a look into monetary policy. It's no longer just about tax cuts. It's now about what's the problem with our money, why is it losing value, why is it when I travel overseas all of a sudden I can't get the same exchange rate that I used to 10 years ago. So I think the Republican Party is changing in our direction. It's coming through the lens of monetary policy, and from there it's going to be a short stair step into things like civil liberties and foreign policy as well.
All right, and those are the theme, the common thread that we see coming from Ron Paul. Ultimately, so this is a big victory for Ron Paul and his supporters. What does it mean for his campaign, this victory in Minnesota?
Well, I think it means that his campaign continues to go on, and that, you know, his supporters who were doing what they were going to do no matter what are going to continue to do it. I mean, there was a little bit, I think, there was a little bit of disappointment when they heard this announcement from the Paul campaign that he wouldn't continue to go after, you know, wins in the primaries, and the mainstream media sort of trumpeted that. But then when the Paulistas came back in Minnesota, they came back strong, and it sort of reinvigorated all the grassroots, and we're ready for battle again. All
right, so he's won Minnesota, took on Minnesota. What is next in the Ron Paul strategy?
Well, I can't really tell you that, because then we wouldn't win the strategy. So I think Ron Paul continues to win delegates in states that have yet to vote. There are a few state conventions to come up. There are delegates still to be won. Romney does not have the 1,144 that are required to give him the nomination. So there's no reason for Paulites to go and stay home. There's still battles to be won.
All right, Austin, I can tell you are a Paulista yourself. If he doesn't win, if he does not secure this nomination and he is not on the ballot, what then would people like you do? Who would you vote for?
That's a really great question. I talked to a lot of libertarians about that. Some libertarians say I would absolutely not vote for anyone besides Ron Paul. Some libertarians say that they might vote for Gary Johnson. I'm a very compromising person, even though I'm a radical libertarian. There are certain circumstances under which I would vote for Mitt Romney. If, for example, the Ron Paul delegates are not disenfranchised at the Tampa Convention, if there are significant platform changes made in the libertarian direction, if Romney reaches out to Ron Paul's coalitions and says we want to include these people in the Republican Party and we want to have them be a part of the Republican Party going forward, that might be the thing that would say to a libertarian who is not such a, total radical, that they would say, all right, then this is worth working for. This is worth spending my time on to continue to reform the GOP. But if the Romney delegates disenfranchise the Ron Paul delegates, if they push us out of the party, if they continue to make trouble for us, well, then you can bet that a lot of libertarians, and probably myself, are going to go vote for Gary Johnson. We will deny the GOP the presidency this year. We'll focus on the Senate and the House to put in a Republican majority, and we'll fight another 4 years until we can come back in 2016 with the candidate we really want.
All right. Well, it looks like you have your plan down. Thank you very much. That was Austin Petersen. He is the director of production for FreedomWorks.